Okay, we'll start with this. Well, ESPN has released their version of the women's pound-for-pound list. And like any pound-for-pound list released from any major periodical, any major organization, any major network, this pound-for-pound list is likely to create just as many arguments as any other pound-for-pound list that either ESPN, Ring Magazine, BoxRec, or Transnational releases. There is widespread debate over who deserves the number one spot now that Cecilia Brækhus' reign as an undisputed champion has ended. Should it be Claressa Shields or should it be Katie Taylor? It really depends on who you ask, and it really depends on what it is you're looking at. How do you substantiate the argument? How does one quantify a fighter's skill? What units of measure, what metrics go into ranking these fighters? I'll say that ESPN's list differs from mine greatly. I don't have Claressa Shields seated in the number one spot. As a result of Cecilia Brækhus, the former number one pound-for-pound fighter on the Ring IQ women's pound-for-pound list, as a result of her being unseated by Jessica McCaskill, you guys know the rules. No fighter coming off a loss is allowed to maintain a spot on this list until they can return to the winner's bracket and once again crown themselves a world champion. As it stands, Cecilia's coming off a loss, she doesn't have her belts anymore, and until she does,
she's out.
She doesn't have a spot on the list. Per the governing criteria that structures the list, no fighter coming off a loss is allowed to maintain a spot on this list, and no fighter absent of a world title is allowed to maintain a spot on this list. Because I'll tell you what, if you start allowing fighters that don't have world titles on your pound-for-pound list, and you start allowing fighters that are coming off of losses, right off of losses, on your pound-for-pound list, then you can make an argument for pretty much anyone. But this is supposed to be a very exclusive list. It's not supposed to be the kind of list to where you can make an argument for anyone.
And everyone.
It's supposed to be a very exclusive list and a very difficult list to get on, as this list is supposed to encompass the best and brightest fighters in the sport, the most skilled of the most skilled.
The bar is supposed to be set high.
The bar of standard, as these are not your ordinary world champions. These are not your ordinary titleists.
This is supposed to be the best of the best.
And it is a matter of fact that both Katie Taylor and Claressa Shields debuted the same year. But it's also a matter of fact that Katie Taylor has unseated more active reigning world champions in the same amount of time that Claressa Shields has been around.
She's had more pro fights?
5 more than Claressa. Katie's quality of competition is significantly better than Claressa's. For every single world title that Katie Taylor has been in possession of, she had to go through a reigning world champion to do it. And that is a lot more difficult. That requires a lot more skill. Skill, which is what we're supposed to be gauging. Requires a lot more skill to win a world title from a world champion than picking up a title that no one is holding. I mean, Claressa Shields here today is a unified champion in the junior middleweight division, but for having beaten who? Ivana Habazin.
What?
Claressa Shields picked up both the WBC and WBO titles, which were vacant, just by fighting Ivana. Ivana herself hadn't done a heck of a lot in the junior middleweight division, but by fighting her, beating her,
she snagged 2 world titles.
2 vacant world titles. What do you think the difficulty level of that is compared with having to move up in weight to win the WBO from Cristina Linares II, or having to take on what was then the undefeated Rose Vellante,
lightweight,
WBO at 135? How do you think that compares with having to take on DELFINE PERSOON, the long-reigning, what was then the long-reigning, WBC champion in the lightweight division?
Which one of those 2 paths requires more skill?
Look, we could be here all day with just Katie and Claressa, and that's why we're going to have to tackle that subject more extensively in another video, as there are more glaring fallacies in association with this list than just Katie and Claressa and where they're ranked relative to each other. You'll notice that Cecilia Brækhus is still on the list,
even though she lost,
which in some spectrums is negligible, but Christina Hammer is also ranked on this list. Christina Hammer, who hasn't done a heck of a lot since she lost her title to Claressa Shields back in April of last year. She's had 1 fight since then against a pedestrian-level opponent with 8 recorded losses.
She's not in possession of a world title.
Yet somehow, Christina Hammer gets a spot on this list, and Jelena Marjanovic doesn't? Jelena Marjanovic, who's a reigning unified champion in the featherweight division with an extensive body of work that spans all the way back to 2003 when she debuted as a professional?
Christina gets a spot and Jelena doesn't.
Not sure how much sense that really makes. Jelena's coming off of consecutive victories. Christina is not. Hell, Jelena hasn't lost a fight.
A long time.
Years. Since 2015.
She doesn't get a spot.
But Christina does. Gee, I wonder why. And never mind that for some reason, Daniela Bermudez is ranked ahead of Jessica Bopp, who just so happens to have beaten Daniela Bermudez. And not once, but twice. Once in 2011, then again in 2014. You tell me how much sense it makes for Daniela Bermudez to be ranked ahead of someone who's beaten her twice.
Jessica Bopp has an extensive body of work.
Jessica Bopp debuted as a professional all the way back in 2008. She hasn't lost a fight since 2013. Currently, she's on, an 11, 12 fight winning streak. If we're being honest, Jessica Bopp has a far better record than Daniela Bermudez, God bless her. They're both pound-for-pound fighters, but one is clearly head and shoulders above the other. Jessica Bopp has a professional record of 36 wins, 16 knockouts, only one loss, and that was years ago. But for some reason, the people at ESPN think Daniela should be ranked ahead of Jessica. Don't ask me why. Doesn't make a lot of sense to me. And it's not just Daniela they've got ranked ahead of Jessica. They also have Christina Hammer. Lest we forget, they've got Christina Hammer at number 7 and Jessica at number 9. Well, they both have the same number of losses, but Jessica's last loss was years ago.
And this is how they reward a 12-fight winning streak.
I reiterate, this list doesn't make a lot of sense to me. But maybe it's because it's not skill that the people at ESPN are rating. Maybe it's because it's familiarity they're using to gauge who should sit in front of who. I mean, why is Layla McCarter, who hasn't held a world title in years and hasn't fought anyone worth mentioning in years, even on this list? Ahead of a Franchon Cruz, ahead of an Aline Cedruz, a Naoko Fujioka, a Tigresa Acuna. I mean, if you're going to go as far as allowing fighters who aren't in possession of world titles, then why isn't Kenya Enriquez on here?
The WBC's interim champion.
I mean, I got nothing against Cecilia Brækhus, but you have to make it make sense. If you're going to allow Cecilia Brækhus, who is coming right off a loss, to maintain a spot on this list, then there is little to no excuse to not also rank Mexico's own Jessica Chavez. She's coming right off a loss, but she has a very extensive body of work. Do you guys have any idea what's on that girl's resume? I'm pretty sure you don't. And I'm pretty sure that the people at ESPN, they don't either. Areli Musinho, 2 times. Naoko Fujioka, Tenkai Tsunami, Jessica Bopp. You're telling me that this girl can't get a spot. Who the fuck does she have to beat to get a spot?
Who the fuck else?
And this is what I mean. The haphazard condition of this list denotes that whoever comprised it, they comprised it based on familiarity, or maybe who fought on an American network, who the American fight fans might be a little bit more familiar with. That had to be the governing criteria of this list. Not boxing and not boxing resumes. Not who these fighters have fought and what they have accomplished. That is a testament to their skills. Put simply, that's not what they're rating, and that explains this list's haphazard condition and innumerable glaring fallacies. The list doesn't make any sense, and like many and every other pound-for-pound list floating around from some major network, some major periodical, you can take several issues with this list the same way you could with the men's pound-for-pound list, because this list is just as shitty as those lists.
So if you wanted to know what I think, that's what I think.
The women's pound-for-pound conversation requires a lot more time, a lot more attention, and a lot more context than we can provide in a single video. So we're going to be talking about this extensively in the next couple of days as far as what the pecking order should be based on the existing Ring IQ pound-for-pound criteria. Moving on. In heavyweight news, Michael Hunter backs Povetkin to beat Dillian Whyte. A knockout is very possible. Michael was quoted as saying, "I think Dillian Whyte is going to have some trouble dealing with him. I think Dillian Whyte is going to lose. I think Dillian Whyte is going to take an L. Povetkin will be there to get him. The fight will be at a decent pace. I think it's going to be an interesting fight to see because the pace is going to be very similar. So I'm probably going to lean towards Povetkin." I think a knockout win for Povetkin is very possible. The percentage is high, and that's why I think that this is a good fight. Because people want to see explosions, and I think they're going to get it here. Even if it's just for 2 minutes, or it might be for the whole fight. We're looking for big punches thrown, and I think that's what the fans are excited to see. In their own contest, Hunter was able to give Povetkin a lot of problems in the early rounds, but the former WBA champion was able to rally back in the second half of the fight. He has veteran experience that goes with him in the ring. Definitely, said Hunter. Very subtle things that he knows what to do. He has the heart of a lion, that's for sure. Just that alone. A very difficult situation to deal with. I think I exposed a lot of stuff. I exposed that he can be easily knocked down in any round. I also exposed that he's not going to lay down. If you don't knock him out, then he's not going to be knocked out. He's not the one to worry about what should happen in that situation. You know, I'm always skeptical whenever I ask one of these guys about someone who they've fought before. I'm always skeptical in these situations because I wonder, are we getting genuine insights into what it's like to deal with that fighter, or is what we're getting self-praise, a subsidiary of it? That you're only really glorifying Povetkin because you shared the ring with him, and in that way, you are indirectly glorifying yourself, stroking your own ego. I really can't call it most of the time, which is why I take these kinds of insights, as it were, with a grain of salt. So my overall assessment of the match has to be based on something else, something other than what Michael Hunter has to say about it, or more than just what Michael Hunter has to say about it, because for all I know, this fucking guy is just stroking his own ego for having fought Alexander Povetkin.
Maybe that's the case.
Maybe it isn't. It's very hard to tell. I will say that Alexander does stand a fighting chance, given his base style, what he's capable of, his explosivity, those angles and those side-to-side movements as he's closing the gap, looking to get under and or around a fighter's jab to come over with a big left hook.
He's dangerous.
Especially in the early rounds of a match, while he's still fresh, before exhaustion has set in, before the punishment has taken its toll. In those early rounds, Alexander Povetkin is not someone to trifle with.
He's actually had time to rest.
Not on their original schedule, you understand. These two guys were supposed to have fought back in May. COVID-19 pandemic, as you can imagine, delayed everything, including this fight. But as a result of that delay, Alexander Povetkin has had more time to rest and more time to train.
More time to prepare.
So where you might have thought that Alexander didn't look his best against Michael Hunter, and he's going right into this fight with Dillian Whyte, where you might have thought that, now you have to consider that Alexander's had more time to rest, more time to train, and more time to prepare.
The same is true for Dillian Whyte.
But what you have to factor in is that if you made your decision based on how Alexander looked in the Michael Hunter fight, and if you made your decision based on potential slippage, father time catching up to Alexander Povetkin, you now have to consider that he's had more time to rest and to train and to prepare. That perhaps now slippage won't be as big a factor as it was before. I'm going to say that the same thing that makes Dillian Whyte such an exciting fighter to watch is the same thing that is working against him in this fight. That he's not this prim and proper, polished boxer. That he has flaws. He's gotten where he's gotten to. He's gotten this far based on hard work and determination.
But perfect is what he ain't.
He can be gotten to. He can be found out. I've heard a lot of the talk from Dillian Whyte leading up to this fight. Maximum violence. Promoting a war of the left hooks, between Dillian Whyte, the body snatcher, and Alexander Povetkin. Both guys, pretty strong left hooks. But in this fight, I don't think it behooves Dillian Whyte to trade shots with Alexander deep in the pocket. If anything, you've got to keep that guy out of there. Make the old man work for it.
Use your legs.
And use your jab, the way you did with Oscar Rivas. Maintain that distance. 'Cause I'll tell you something. Dillian Whyte is running the risk of losing it all if he so decides to make this a war instead of a finesse fight. If you let this guy close the gap, trade hooks with him, you're doing half the work for him, you understand? This is where he's trying to get to the majority of the match. That is his sweet spot. So what Dillian Whyte has to do is work to keep him out of that sweet spot, not engage him in it.
This is cause for concern.
I didn't get the chance to react to Dillian Whyte and his old trainer Mark Tibbs parting ways, and how that might affect the outcome of this match. It's not the least bit encouraging that all of a sudden Mark Tibbs ain't going to be in Dillian Whyte's corner and it's going to be Adam Booth. That's essentially saying that Dillian Whyte is going into this fight with a veteran trainer, yes, but in an experimental phase. We don't know that you've even got a rapport with this guy. To surmise my thoughts on Whyte versus Povetkin and Michael Hunter's insights, I do happen to think that Alexander Povetkin stands a fighting chance, perhaps even a little more than just a fighting chance. But it's not based on what Michael Hunter said, because I reiterate, for all I know, that guy's just stroking his own ego. I give Alexander Povetkin a fighting chance because, one, Dillian Whyte ain't perfect. Two, he's not with his old trainer anymore. It's not the least bit encouraging ahead of a big fight against a dangerous, experienced guy like Alexander Povetkin, even if he's pushing 40.
I'm telling you.
That age of his, it might not show up until later on in a match, whereas Alexander Povetkin is fully capable of ending a match early. And the bottom line here is, it really isn't a foregone conclusion that Dillian Whyte is going to win on Saturday. It's just not.